Fantastic. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We are delighted that you're joining us today to talk about the SEC's 2024 exam and enforcement priorities. A few housekeeping matters before we get started. We are recording today's conversation and plan to share it with you following today's session. We appreciate your willingness to participate in the dialogue today and welcome any of your questions throughout today's session. Please use the chat box at the bottom of your screen to submit questions to the panelists. And we've allotted plenty of time at the end of today's conversation, the last 15 minutes or so, to address your questions. And it goes without saying nowadays, but we are all working from home potentially. So you may hear some background noises in the office. We appreciate your patience in advance. Without further ado, let's jump into introducing our wonderful panelists. To get us started, I'm just going to make a quick note that Rhonda Davis is not able to join us. She is not doing too well, so I've asked my colleague, Mr. Randy Barnes, to step in. With that said, maybe, Tom, I can ask you to begin with the introductions.
Sure. Thanks, Param, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak at this webinar. I'm a big fan of InvestorCom, and I'm a big fan of your webinars. My name is Tom Selman. I'm president and CEO of Scopus Financial Group. We provide regulatory consulting to broker-dealers, investment advisors, and trade associations. Prior to that, I was executive vice president for regulatory policy and legal compliance officer at FINRA.
Thank you, Tom. Armin, you're next on my screen.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Param, for having me on this panel. I'm Armin Sarabi. I am the Chief Compliance Officer and General Counsel at Alphastar Capital Management in Cornelius, North Carolina. I've been in the industry for about 15 years, have served in various capacities, both as in-house counsel and outside counsel, as well as several CCO positions with various investment firms. Mostly in the RIA side and 1940 Act. I have done some work with broker-dealers as well, and some FINRA litigation. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you, Armin, and welcome. Mr. Bob McGill.
Thanks, appreciate it, Param. I'm Bob McGill. I am the president of compliance and compensation for Docupace. Docupace is a platform-oriented software vendor in the financial services space. And I actually came to Docupace because I was a founder of a company called Giacomo about 23 years ago, which was focused and is focused. We were acquired by Docupace about 2.5 years ago on data integration, compensation automation, and compliance automation. So in my capacity, I spend a lot of time talking to CCOs and compliance people in the field about what it is they need in terms of technology and automation support. So I'm glad to be here.
Thank you, Bob. Mr. Barnes.
Thank you, Param, and appreciate the opportunity to pinch hit today. Randy Barnes, the director of our product and sales engineering and technology here at InvestorCom. Like Bob, I've been in the wealth management fintech technology space for 25 years now. And actively engaged with our clients and prospects on how we can help facilitate a technology solution to some of these wonderful pain points that we're going to be talking about today.
Thank you, Randy. For as long as I've known you, you've been using the same 25-year reference point. So at some point, we'll hope to see that number kind of etch up. Folks, I'm your moderator. My name is Parm Nasseri. I head up our product and regulatory strategy here at InvestorCom. We're delighted that you're here. And if you haven't come across InvestorCom, we are a leading regulatory software provider for wealth managers across North America. And our award-winning platform is known for being intuitive and help eliminate compliance risk and foster growth for our clients. Now, without further ado, what are we going to talk about today? Can't click and talk at the same time. On our agenda, we'll have a very, very timely discussion about the convergence of best interest principles across regulation best interests, what the SEC is expecting on their exam priorities, as well as given the DOL fiduciary proposal that's being talked about in Washington today. Then we'll jump into specific exam priorities and focus areas focus on what firms can do from a repeatable process perspective when determining best interest advice or best interest recommendations. And then we'll do a deep dive and look forward to how and when technology can be used as an asset when considering reasonably available alternatives, account type analysis, and recommendations. So if very enriching conversation, please engage with us throughout the dialogue. We've got 15 minutes at the end of today's session to address any questions that you may have. Okay. Prior to today's webinar, as we often do, we ask our community of participants, our clients, as well as webinar attendees about their specific questions related to the webinar that they're attending. And so we started by asking, which exam priority are you most concerned about? And as you can see, given the attendance, given the webinar attendees, majority of folks are concerned about how examinations are going to go around assessing costs and reasonably available alternatives. Of note, however, keeping policies and procedures up to date still remains a common point of concern for folks in our industry. What else? We asked...
I was just going to say, it seems like that poll question comes out very similarly every time. The people are worried about reasonably available alternatives and they're worried about their policies and procedures. So it's interesting. There's a consistency, as I recall.
Absolutely. It is probably one of the most talked about topics that any conference that we've attended to. It is something that we hope we play a part in solving for our respective clients in the industry. So what else did people say? What about on the enforcement front? Again, Tom, to your point, reasonably available alternatives is a pain point, is a risk area. Rollover recommendations are also a potential issue. And then also electronic communications. Off-channel communications has been something that's caught a few headlines on the enforcement front. So we'll dive into those topics in a few. We also asked, do you have a process for making best interest recommendations? Some are using technology, which we appreciate and applaud. Others are, or I should say most are using a manual paper Excel, PDF based. Bob, I'm sure you'll have plenty to say about that. And then 24% are indicating that they don't actually have a consistent process. So we'll talk a little bit about that today as well. Finally, we said, why have you not adopted technology for making best interest recommendations? And this is something we're often curious about. And the responses today were a bit more diverse than we typically see. And 30% indicated they have adopted technology. Other reasons for not adopting technology are using manual processes as well as a concern around advisor adoption. So we'll talk about that a bit again today. Excellent. Without further ado, let's jump into things. And so the way we tackle the specific Department of Examinations priorities is by looking at the investment advisor examination areas, and then we'll break it up and go into practical implications for what that means for the industry, and then dive into what broker-dealers will need to be concerned about from an examination perspective. So for the record, this is sort of in the 10th year of publication. This document comes out and it helps people in the industry assess how to focus their compliance priorities. And really the first point that was made surrounding the investment advisor segment is the fact, again, I believe the SEC is reminding the industry about the importance of the duty of care and duty of loyalty, and those obligations remain a priority for the division. Tom, is there a reason they are, again, specifically calling this duty of care and duty of loyalty back out?
Yeah, Parm, but before I begin, I kind of hesitate to do this, but I want to make a plug for my former employer, FINRA, because if you compare how the exam priorities are laid out by the SEC, which is, of course, a government agency, versus FINRA, which is not, there is a huge difference. FINRA, when they lay out the exam priorities, and we were doing this even a few years before I left, will show you what is new. They'll put in bold what's new. It's very focused. They often have, I think they typically do now have best practices that they've seen. It's actually, if you pick up a FINRA exam priorities report and you're in compliance, it actually is almost an instruction manual on how to prepare. Whereas frankly, the SEC's exam priorities reports are still global, very general. They cover just about everything. And this is an example. I mean, to say, well, we're concerned about examining investment advisors, and two things we want you to focus on are duty of care and duty of loyalty, it's just not that helpful. I mean, of course they're going to focus on that. Those are the core responsibilities of an investment advisor. I do think it's a good question, though, in terms of the relationship to Reg BI, which is really what we're talking about, the convergence between the different standards of care. And the SEC staff has made pretty clear that many of the principles in Reg BI are the same as the principles that apply to the fiduciary duty for an advisor. So I think that, and the opposite is true as well. If I'm a compliance person for an investment advisor, even if they're a standalone advisor, I'm going to be interested in what the principles are in Reg BI, even though I don't have to apply them, because the commission staff at least sees those as converging quite a bit. So, for example, comparing different reasonably available alternatives, the commission's made very clear that that's part of the duty of care. Looking at costs, of course, is obviously an issue. The procedures you have for dealing with conflicts, you should have procedures that I would think are fairly similar on both sides. So I think in terms of the convergence, I just want to emphasize that even if you only provide compliance support for just an investment advisor, I would recommend that you become very, very educated in what the commission's position is on Reg BI as well.
Thanks, Tom. And for sure the April 2023, April feels like, light years ago, but April guidance note for sure will be a good stepping stone for what firms in the industry can expect on that. They do specifically go as far as saying, look, what we stated out in the Reg BI's duty of care requirements does actually apply for the investment advisory segment as well.
Right.
Which really segues into the other point. The Department of Exams and this particular priority document goes on to highlight investment advice provided to clients with regards to products, which we knew, investment strategies. But this specific priority document talks a lot about account types. Armin, if I could point the mic to you, what do you think is the really cause of concern behind account type recommendations that pops up throughout this document?
It is interesting. I would say time will tell, because obviously they've listed it as an exam priority. So we'll see what the SEC was looking for as the results of some of the exams coming up in 2024 start to be published. I would say that the account type, realistically speaking, has been, from a historical perspective, part of what an advisor who is a fiduciary should take into consideration. I mean, realistically speaking, there are different account types that offer different benefits and may have different costs associated with them, or things that are material to the investor. And so certainly, while we traditionally think about things like the investment advice, I think the recommendation to place the investments into a specific type of an account should be considered as something that falls within the fiduciary obligation. I believe that's what the SEC is doing here. Now, I will say this new commission is focused a little bit more in reiterating some of these things, or being a little bit more specific. So I think they're kind of moving towards the FINRA side just ever so slightly in that aspect. And that's probably what's going on here, is that the commission wanted to make sure and highlight that account type is something that should be considered. And realistically speaking, I mean, I think we are seeing sort of a convergence among different regulatory agencies. And the Department of Labor certainly highlighted account types as a consideration when we are defining what a rollover would be. And so I think it's just important for us to keep that in mind. And obviously, whether you're in a traditional brokerage account or a retirement account, education account, and so forth. I mean, each of those have different tax considerations and benefits to the investors. Certainly, that could fall within the fiduciary obligation to make sure that the recommendation is in the best interest of the client.
Love it. I mean, we certainly hear about the specific account type recommendations and the examination questions that are being asked around it. Randy, I wonder if I could ask you to, in your pinch hitting role, step in and just share with our audience what you've been garnering from speaking to our clients about this.
Absolutely. So the two biggest things that I think come to mind, one, folks that are traditionally tying this analysis to a specific process, like a new account opening, are finding it a little bit difficult to pivot if the end result is that it's not in their best interest to go with the account type that they recommended, or it's harder for them to kind of assume that they're going to walk through a new account opening process to get to this point, right? If that's kind of how they've built this process in today. So that's one big consideration. I would certainly be an advocate for this is its own thing, and it can certainly plug into a new account opening. It could plug into a proposal or a financial planning conversation, right? It kind of it's its own thing that should be leveraged that way. The other piece, quite frankly, is making sure that you're taking into consideration your firm's needs and your client's needs, which doesn't necessarily play well with a generic template, which I think a lot of firms have been starting with. Like, hey, let me just go see what's available. Let me talk to my friend over here. Let me get a download of something over here. And we'll just trot that out as our process. It's challenging to illustrate that your policy procedures are reflected in there and that you're pulling the information in from your customer if you're using one of those templated, simple check the box type of an exercises. So whatever you're doing, whether it's paper, system, smoke signals, doesn't matter. Make sure that it's relevant, with those two components as well.
I can give you a little additional input on that. One of the things we're hearing from our clients is keeping a track on money that's moving between different kinds of account types. It's one thing, as Randy talks about, you want to make sure that you are putting new money or new accounts in the appropriate kind of account that matches the objectives and the cost structure and is in the best interest of a client. But especially for some of our larger clients, one of the things that's harder for them to manage is to be able to keep track of money that's maybe went into a brokerage account, maybe it was in cash for a while, then it moved over into an advisory account, may have moved back. Keeping track of the accounts that are under management, not under management, and the cost structure associated with that is something that we're seeing not a huge amount of scrutiny on, but I would say at least half of our clients have come to us and said, help us get a handle on this because we don't see this all the time. Sometimes this happens directly at a particular fund, and then we just get the transaction in retrospect and it doesn't stand out to us. So it's an ongoing, I guess my point is it's an ongoing kind of thing in addition to where you're opening the account. You also have to keep an eye on how the account's being managed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I find this topic, I mean, we started with the idea of convergence of regulatory expectations between what the SEC's BI requirements are, and then the DOL's sort of layer of purview on it. And then what we're talking about, Rob, now, I mean, or Bob, you just highlighted is, look, it starts with that initial account type recommendation is an advisory account that has a higher degree of handholding, I'll use that term, appropriate for all your investors, right? And then have you actually discussed the different options, costs, service offerings at the time of opening up that account with your investors or your clients? And that particular point, actually, there's a sidebar / tangent in which the SEC in March of 2022 came out with very specific requirements, specifically actually highlighting their guidance around the particular focus area specifically for duly registered. Mind you, it still applies. Again, this particular Department of Examination focus does go on and say it goes beyond just duly registered, which we'll talk about in a bit, but it is a bit of a focus area from the time of the recommendation to the ongoing monitoring and the relationship that comes in there.
Parham, one additional thing, just kind of circle back around maybe to some of the feedback that we got in the poll, right? This whole advisor adoption is a concern, and that's why we don't do X, right? Part of that is having a deliberate understanding of when you're going to require the financial professional to do X, whichever assessment it is, whether it's the reasonably available alternative, it's the account type, it's the rollover, right? Having an understanding of what part of their day-to-day activity requires them to do this and making it clear around when they do it helps break down some of those barriers of adoption, because they're not guessing. And it's another thing that I would urge the participants to think about here is make sure you have a very good, clear understanding around what part of their day this stuff needs to be done in, because that's going to go a long way to helping knock down some of those barriers.
100%, Randy. And I think your point reminds me of you and I were at a specific conference where a FINRA regulator was talking about not seeing any sort of due diligence at the account type opening, and then opening up a brokerage account, investing the client's assets in an annuity, and then transferring the annuity into an advisory account, which, Bob, goes to your point. And that's
exactly
that's exactly what I think the 2 points of concern or economic incentives that come into that analysis comes in. Tom, this is the point. Economic incentives was probably another one of the most cited points in the Department of Exams priority statement. And there is a point about duly registered brokers and dealers in there. And, I know FINRA has also called this particular piece out. What are the regulators particularly focused on when surrounding this point around economic incentives?
Well, if you look at the SEC report, I think page 8, I believe, really goes into the question of economic incentives. And there are two basic economic incentives I think probably everybody is familiar with now. The first is the question of whether a particular product, we mentioned variable annuity would be a good example, or an account type, such as an advisory account type, is just more expensive and will generate more revenue for the firm, theoretically. So that's one type of economic incentive. And the other type of economic incentive is a recommendation of a product or service that's provided by an affiliate of the firm, or maybe even the firm itself, and it's a proprietary product or service. I'm old enough to remember when, for example, you'd have Merrill Lynch and other major wirehouses offer their own proprietary mutual funds. And it was very hard to get onto their platform if you weren't a Merrill Lynch mutual fund. Obviously, that all changed, but part of the reason that changed was that the SEC viewed an inherent conflict of interest in only offering proprietary products. So those are the two types of economic incentive that they're focusing on. And it's not just the SEC, as you said. FINRA looks at it, DOL looks at it, the states look at it. Economic incentives are the core of the conflict of interest. One concern I have is that too often when regulators talk about economic incentives, they veer off into a discussion of cost and sometimes make it appear as if cost is the only consideration in the choice of accounts or products. I think the SEC does it more than FINRA, and the states are even worse, where you would think the cost was the only consideration. If you look at Reg BI, if you look at the advisor fiduciary duty, it's quite clear if a broker or an advisor rep only looks at competing costs, for example, when they're doing reasonably available alternatives, if they're only doing a cost-based analysis, they have failed to meet the best interest standard. It's got to look at the particular needs of the customer, the particular attributes of the service or the product, and how those match. Cost is only one factor. So I think to the extent that the regulators sometimes use language, I think the report does this a bit, that seems to be limited to cost. I would encourage people to make sure that they're considering a lot more than cost.
It's a really good point, Tom.
Yeah, I'll add to that. Actually, I think that's a great point. From personal experience, having sat through a number of SEC examinations, this issue definitely comes up, and it's come up over the years. And cost seems to be the starting point, because I think it's the easiest way to take a look at this thing. But at the end of the day, to Tom's point, there's so many other factors. So I would just say for everyone who's listening today, watching today, that what we want to do, just make sure that you're documenting your process, and identifying the various factors that were taken into consideration when making this recommendation, so that when a question comes up, we can simply pull up those notes and then explain that this is why we feel that it is in the best interest of the client. I found that in that kind of a situation, the regulators are very quick to understand that there's more to it. I mean, they've acknowledged themselves that cost isn't the only factor, but they certainly seem to start there in these situations.
Yeah, I agree with Armin. I think if you have good documentation, it's a great, obviously a great benefit in an exam. And I think another way to look at costs is to say, if you've got an IE rep or a registered rep who is always consistently recommending the more costly product or service, you probably have a problem. But if you have a rep who's always recommending the cheapest cost or service, that doesn't mean you don't have a problem. It probably means you have a problem as well. So, but I agree, documentation is very important.
And good data, right? Which is, the flip side of documentation. It's important to have the paperwork in place, but it's also important to capture the information on that paperwork, because it's dynamic. It changes over time, right? And what made sense a year ago may not make sense now. So do you know what the needs are now? And are you actively managing and moving the things around so that they continue to be in the best interest of the client, is the other dimension of this.
Hey, we've started with the capital F word, the fiduciary word. Now we're talking about capital D, documentation. This is a well-rounded conversation. I do want to point out, I had this question for Rhonda, and her and I have talked about it quite a bit because it comes up in regulatory examination. So in Randy's terminology, I'll pinch it. There is particular mention in the statement of priorities around complex products, and we get this question quite often. Everyone's aware of the additional layer of risk related to complex products, illiquid securities, non-traded REITs, the list goes on. But what Rhonda and I have experienced in specific examinations that our clients are, I don't know if they're mutual, but our respective clients have gone through, is non-complex products. And from what we've seen in the industry, obviously complex products are an area of risk, but non-complex products have often come up as well. In fact, when we have asked the SEC specific questions around, well, do you require this cost and reasonably available alternatives analysis around non-complex products? The short answer to that question has been, of course. Don't forget that our staff bulletin in April had 16 questions, and one of the questions was complex products. So I think it's important to highlight that in the spirit of our conversation as well. I'm done pinch hitting. Randy, let me ask you specific questions around sort of what you've seen in the industry around sort of automating that process or adding a layer of technology or consistency around considering costs and available alternatives, whether it's account type or products. What do you tend to see?
Well, it actually kind of goes partially to some of those survey results, right? You've got to have it, I'm going to call it relevant or deliberately simple so that your adoption is there, but you're still providing the value and incorporating the appropriate things that align with your policies and procedures as a firm. It can't be, it's not a one size fits all. I mean, I've said this for the 25-ish years, Parham, that I've been in this industry. We can barely agree that water's wet, much less that there's one right way to do things. So from whatever perspective you're coming at this from, it's got to be adaptable to your policy and procedures, right? That's a big one. The other thing that I think we try to kind of tease out is making sure that you're not just focused on one player, right? Where everybody's worried about the adoption and making it easy on the advisor and making it clear that this is when they have to do things. But Bob touched on a little bit on the data side. There's a home office component to this as well that also needs to be considered for this assessment, so that they can do their job and make sure that on an ongoing basis, their policies are relevant. They understand how the client's impacted from a supervisory perspective, right? Their job's got to be easier too. You don't want to just move the problem from one end of the funnel to the other. You want to actually try to break it down. So we have a lot of conversations around both those aspects with our folks.
Thanks, Randy. Armin, given this, what feels somewhat unprecedented level of focus surrounding recommendations, what have you done to set up your firm and financial professionals for success?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I mean, I think at the end of the day, when we consider recommendations, we go back to sort of the same thing we've been discussing this entire webinar, which is it in the best interest of the client, right? And so really the question is, how are we addressing that and protecting ourselves, in the instance that the regulators, ask for us to demonstrate that we've done that. So I think at a very high level, I would say, and obviously we do this at our firm, and I would recommend that everyone does this, but we want to make sure that we have written policies and procedures in place that will, that address the needs, around reviewing recommendations, making sure that they are in the best interest of the clients and so forth. Alongside of that, there's disclosure considerations, and there's always things that we need to disclose, and the commission loves disclosures. In fact, I think that's in many ways kind of your way to make sure that both disclosing to the commission itself and also to the advisory clients. And then we've discussed this a little bit already, but just making sure that we're maintaining our books and records and that they're in a proper order and easy to access and provide when asked for. So I would say at the high level, that's really it. Really to kind of take a deeper dive into that, when we're talking about recommendations and in light of our fiduciary obligation, duty of care, duty of loyalty, and how it fits in the best interest, I think some of this really goes to just making sure that we are taking the steps necessary to really understand the client needs and their client's profile. Things like understanding their financial situation and needs, current investments, age, time horizon, liquidity needs, risk tolerance, things like that. And of course, their investment objectives and goals and so forth. And then once we have a clear picture of what the client's circumstances look like and what their needs are, then really making sure that the recommendation is suitable for the client. The commission highlighted some of these things in this 2024 exam priorities. They highlighted suitability, best execution, costs and risk, and then also identifying conflicts of interest. And I think that's a huge one as well. But ultimately, we just want to make sure that we are taking the time to and putting in the steps to make sure that the recommendation is aligned with a process where the advisor and the client have had the opportunity to come together and really understand what the client's needs are, and that we are addressing those needs in a way that is suitable for the client and that is in their best interest and so forth. So once all that's done, obviously, the books and records is the biggest part. We talked about it a little bit earlier, but just making sure that we're maintaining those records, that they're clear notes. And frankly, I would say, to the extent that things can be automated, I highly recommend finding ways to automate this process, because having a universal approach to this, especially for some of us who have bigger firms, or frankly, at our firm, we work with independent advisors. So they all have sort of variations in how they approach this. But if we can create a universal approach, that makes it much, much easier when we do have to provide this information to a regulator, because there's a universal front, if you will, and they sort of see a consistent approach across from one advisor to the next.
That can be enforced by the technology, so the regulator can have confidence that it's actually being done that way.
Exactly. Yes.
Armin, the other thing I'll throw out, I agree, especially with the books and records, but with the other two dimensions you mentioned, one of the interesting things a few of our more advanced clients have come to us to talk about is to get a handle on the producer training and capabilities. So getting back a little bit to some of the more complex products and the liquid products we talked about, not all producers are positioned to sell those safely, right? So we've had some clients who I think are forward-looking who've said, listen, I want to track who's been through what training, not necessarily for the licensing standpoint, that you got to do, but there's additional training that might enable you to understand how to sell leveraged and inverse product, for example, right? And to understand that those are very specific products for very specific niche needs by investors in the field. Show me that the person who is actually selling those products has the skills to do it, and show me that the positions that he or she has created are closed out when they need to be closed out. Those are typically short-term products, and we need to know if something's been on the books for 2 years and it's inverse, right? That's probably not correct. Mm-hmm. So it's the three things you mentioned, absolutely. And then sort of an emerging one I'm seeing is that understanding and profiling your producers out there and making sure that they are positioned to do the kind of business that they're doing will help you manage risk.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that's actually an important point. And I would actually throw structured notes in there as well, because that's another complex product. And, you know, yeah, we provide training to the advisors here who want to sell structured notes as well. But I would say at the end, we want to make sure that the advisors have the proper training and have the understanding behind these complex products. And then frankly, I think if they don't, this is where the firm has to make some difficult decisions and simply just say, you're not qualified to recommend this product right now. And so
or pull in a specialist or pull in a
specialist. Yeah. So there has to be the firm has to mitigate this in some fashion. It's not just a rubber stamp, obviously.
Really good points. Let me just do a quick time check and a pause and invite our audience to ask any questions via the chat box. Again, we've allotted time to tackle any of your burning questions throughout today's conversation, which segues into an invitation that we wanted to put out there around a Lunch and Learn series. There is, Randy touched on it, there's plenty of questions that come across our desk around reasonably available alternatives. How do you do it? How and when specifically? And then also, how do you apply technology? And then how do you document consistently across your organization? So we're going to bring in our clients and folks in the industry. There is a set number of seats, so jump in and we'll follow up with you following today's webinar with a sign-up sheet for it. Bustling forward, there is a similar sort of theme across what broker dealers have to watch out for. But before we jump into that, Tom, you and I have talked about this topic a little bit, and we saw it in the poll results. There are firms who are still, in fact, sitting on the sidelines and saying, look, let me just take a more of a manual-based approach and not adopting technology. Given that you advise firms of all sizes, how do you see these regulatory exam questions adding pressure to folks who are maybe not as compelled to adopt technology?
Well, I, for one, if I go to a professional like a doctor and I see that everything's paper-based, I'm kind of less impressed than if it's all technology. They don't seem to be with it. But aside from that, I think there are two general reasons that firms decide to adopt the technology to deal with their compliance questions. The first is they're afraid of new enforcement actions or regulatory actions by their regulator. So there may be something coming out like some new wrinkle on IRA rollovers or some question on reasonably available alternatives. And when they see that, they think, we better have some kind of compliance system. First, they do their WSPs, and then they realize, well, maybe we ought to have some kind of technology to deal with it. That's one reason. The other reason is more of a steady drip of inefficiency created by the manual paper systems. And so that over time, after accumulating, a lot of just wasted resources and wasted time with a paper-based system, they finally say, okay, let's go with technology. I think either of those are reasonable. And when I look at the poll results, I think almost almost like, I think it was like 24% of the people polled in our poll said that they haven't adopted technology, or they're reluctant to adopt technology, either because of the time and resources it takes to adopt the technology, or to try to convince the advisors to adopt the technology. And the interesting thing is, I think that those answers are exactly the opposite of how people should look at it. The time and expense of adopting technology is more than saved if it's good technology, and the time and expense you're not spending with a paper-based system. And by the way, the paper-based system, as we've already discussed, has a lot of compliance risk and enforcement risk associated with it. So there's obviously an expense if you have to pay a fine or a settlement because you had a paper-based system that recorded something you didn't mean to have recorded. So looking at the time and expense of technology adoption without considering that the wasted time is essentially ignoring the opportunity cost. So I don't think that's a good way to look at it. The other reason the failure by financial advisors to accept the technology, I think, is also the wrong way to look at it. They don't like to accept technology that's a silly technology, which firms have adopted. But if something's going to actually speed up the process, if it's simple and very straightforward, most FAs, they don't want to spend a lot of time on the compliance part of it. So if it can reduce their time in a way that's really easy to understand and it's consistent, then they're happy to adopt it. So I think looking at those two poll answers is a good way of thinking about how technology should be adopted, both to create long-term efficiencies and also to make things easier for the FAs.
Excellent point, Tom. Thank you. Randy, I wonder if you could just chime in a bit on, or pinch hit a bit on the sort of different frameworks around considering costs and available alternatives. There is obviously the decision tree based way of saying, look, a firm will define how every single advisor, whether they're independent or not, will need to go through a particular decision tree, versus the other one that's advisor led.
Yeah, great question, Parham. You know, I kind of put it in the perspective of kind of knowing the lane that you're in, right? And Tom, you kind of touched on it a little bit. These guys they don't want to spend a lot of time on compliance. They want it to be, fairly straightforward, fairly easy to use. And, that's kind of where my head goes to is I don't want to pretend that I'm part of a financial planning software or a proposal system where I'm trying to lead them down a decision tree path. They already have this knowledge in their head. There's a ton of value in the human capital that your advisors and financial professionals bring to the table. They're already going through this process. The way I look at this is they just need an easy way to document what they already know and what they're already being asked to do, so that they can kind of have their little get out of jail free card, right? So that's where I'm saying know your lane, right? Compliance is a compliance tool. Don't try to be something different. And by the same token, a financial planning software shouldn't try to be a compliance tool. Like there's deliberate reasons why one is one and the other is the other. So that's kind of where we've been thinking about, or I've been thinking about it, is making it easier for them to capture their compliance without confusing matters into a planning or proposal type of a process.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. And maybe we can expedite things given where we are. Man, does time fly when we have wonderful panelists here with us in the conversation. So maybe I can kind of segue between what we're seeing on the broker-dealer side and specifically on the enforcement front. On November 14th, the SEC released its fiscal year 23 enforcement results, announcing that it had filed 784 total actions in 23, a 3% increase over 22, as well as obviously resulting in nearly $5 billion in remedies. What we've been seeing in the industry, at least from our observation, has been somewhat of a additional wave or a new wave of enforcement action that's been focused on on conflicts. And Tom, I know you've talked a lot about this, and specifically what you saw in the Western International case. Any views on as the SEC begins to sharpen their enforcement lens on the care obligation? What do folks have to kind of watch out for?
Well, first of all, I want to emphasize the Western International case is a complaint. It's not even a settled action, let alone a decision or a regulatory statement. But even that aside, the complaint does give insight about how the SEC is thinking about Reg BI. And, a lot of it is actually process still. The two things that struck me about the complaint that I found interesting were, first of all, the insistence on documentation, which we've discussed, documentation that a rep, for why a rep felt that a recommendation, these were, as I recall, the products at issue were L bonds, which were a specific type of corporate bond. The question was, well, how do they document their best interest analysis? It wasn't simply, a question of whether it was the right analysis or the wrong analysis. There was no real good contemporary documentation of how they made the recommendation. And similarly, there wasn't adequate documentation of the reasonably available alternatives that they considered. So documentation as a process was very important, I think, in that case. Another aspect of it, similarly related to compliance procedures, was in due diligence about the product. And as I recall, the complaint indicated that there were, there's due diligence done. There was, I think there was third-party due diligence. There was a report prepared, but none of the report and none of the information got down to the registered reps. It was all kept at a higher level. And then the firm decided, we could offer these products, but the rep didn't know anything about it. So I think both in terms of the documentation and also kind of the vertical transmission of information about due diligence on specific products and information about specific products, both those types of procedures came up. And I think that's very interesting, both in terms of what it's saying about those specific issues, but also in the fact that going forward, the SEC is going to focus on compliance, on books and records, on documentation, on WSPs with Reg BI, just as they do with everything else. You may not see many cases where specific recommendations were not in the customer's best interest, where the substantive requirement is violated, but you will see cases where everything around it was violated. There weren't good procedures, there wasn't good technology, there weren't good documents. So I think the case, even though, again, it's a complaint, it can tell us a lot about where the SEC's headed.
And if it takes us back to a little bit to the technology discussion, we talked about how valuable technology can be in terms of enforcing consistency of process. It also is valuable in producing automatic documentation.
Yes.
And so if you go through the technology, there are documents that come out at the end. Not always, but where appropriate, there are documents that come out and they are automatically filed or indexed to the right investor, to the right product, to the right account. So when going through a regulatory audit, they're there, right? Mm-hmm. Forget about whether it was in the best interest or not. It's probably true that a lot of the violations are documentation oriented.
Yeah.
Right. You don't know whether it was in the best interest because you didn't write it down, or you put some generic note out there that doesn't really explain the process that you went through.
Right.
So you can be compliant without technology. It's not that you have to have technology, but what technology allows you to do is take some of the risk off the table because the stuff happens automatically.
Absolutely. I would add two things, actually, and I think we're all sort of saying it, but I just want to make it really clear. And Tom, you mentioned it. I mean, it's not so much the discussion of whether it's actually in the best interest, because certainly it could be in the best interest. But I think the presumption is that if you're missing the documents or they're not in good order and the process wasn't done right and so forth, then the presumption is that it probably wasn't in the best interest of the client. And now you've got to actually work to defend your position, as opposed to if we had everything in place already, which again, I mean, I think everyone has said it here, technology, it's 2020, almost 2024, and technology is everywhere. AI is everywhere. There's lots of tools out there to make us easy for us. So if we have these things, set out properly, then it helps us sort of overcome that initial presumption. because we've put everything in order, all the ducks are in a row, and now the conversation becomes a much easier one with the regulators, as opposed to having to sort of defend against that. The other thing I want to kind of point out, though, is this: what's interesting about this the Western International Securities case, and you said that it was just a complaint. And I've seen this in a few other cases. There was another case with the SEC versus Qatar, which was actually allowed the SEC to sort of reach into the annuities world, which isn't even within securities. But I think we're kind of just something to keep in mind here is that even though these are just complaints and they haven't gone through the final hearing and so forth, it does really demonstrate that the SEC is able to shift policy and is able to shift the way the industry addresses things simply by bringing a claim out there. And we really should pay attention to those things, even if they don't succeed. It's a good warning to everyone that when we see those cases come up, that this is something that could happen to any of us. So it's an interesting sort of approach by the commission that way.
Yeah, I agree, Armin. I don't intend to minimize the significance of it, even though it is a complaint. I think, let's put it this way. In some ways, it's more chilling because it is a complaint. It's enforcement actually going to the courts and saying, this is how we think Reg B ought to be interpreted.
This is excellent remarks, and I think we've covered plenty of ground surrounding what the exam priorities are, the capital F fiduciary world, capital D documentation, and obviously the consistency of process that technology brings into the mix. Folks, we've got our panelists for a few additional minutes. If you've got any additional questions, please jump in. If not, I'll continue with my train of questions for our panelists. Armin, you just touched on this, but I wonder if there's an opportunity for us to kind of delve into it a bit more. There seems to be enormous pressure around the obvious risk of enforcement, examination findings. As a chief compliance officer and obviously general counsel at your firm, how do you sleep at night? And how do you make sure your firm, along with your financial professionals, are steering clear of those potential risks?
Yeah, that's a great question. And obviously, it's something that's on all of our minds, right? Not just compliance professionals, but I think, firm principals, advisors, frankly, everybody that works at the firm should be concerned about these things. And everyone wants to steer clear of enforcement. The reality is, and that the commission or various other regulatory agencies, they're really working with the industry as a whole. More in partnership than the intent isn't so much to take us to enforcement. The intent is to work with us as a self-regulatory sort of body to regulate ourselves and make sure that we're doing the right things. I think just very high level stuff. A culture of compliance is just the top thing that I could really come up with. I would say that having the right culture of compliance, having people at the top who understand the importance of compliance, not just from a sense of staying out of a regulatory jail, but really understanding the need for the regulations and the protection that it brings the investors, and wanting to participate in that, in that arena to make sure that the clients that we serve are well protected. And then that sort of coming down from the top through the ranks, that's just a key thing. And obviously investing in your compliance program is important. We're the day of having a single person who wears 3 hats between managing the firm and being an advisor and a compliance officer. Those days are long gone. There's a lot of regulation out there. There's a lot of requirements. It's simply not a one-person job, let alone a third of a person job. So really understanding that, investing in the people, investing in the technology and so forth is really important. Again, we've talked about this, but making sure that the policies and procedures are in place, that they're customized to your firm. Certainly just a check the box set of policies and procedures aren't going to work. We all have very different and unique attributes to our businesses that have to be accounted for. And then I would actually recommend, working with outside consultants. I find that working with outside consultants helps in a few different ways. First of all, it brings a different perspective and a different set of knowledge, and information that we may not have here at our firm specifically. But also what it does is it creates an opportunity for an independent review of the program. Here at Alphastar, we work with ACA compliance, and we're very happy with them. There's lots of compliance firms out there, that offer those types of services. But I would say working with outside consultants is a really good one. And then obviously, just going to drive this home, but reducing or eliminating the potential for human error and just creating efficiencies in the process. And I can't think of a better way to do that today than to use the right technology. And along those lines, we've talked about this a lot, but when I say right technology, for us, having a number of independent advisors, a number of independent branches, when I say right technology, I'm thinking about something that not only gets our needs met, but also is adaptable by the group that's out there. And that's a huge thing. If we're going to implement a technology that doesn't, that's not welcomed by the field, then that's not going to work for us. And so we always look for a technology that allows some sort of customization, that allows us to adapt the program so that it's a seamless process from some of the more antiquated ways that we've been working in things. I'll give you guys a great example. The Department of Labor, when they came out with PTE 2020, we had a manual process on paper, but then we switched over to rollover analyzer. And one of the greatest things about that was the fact that we could actually duplicate our paper process in the rollover analyzer platform. And that made it super easy for our folks to just make that transition. Nobody griped about it. And that was, that's really what I look for, when I try to implement new technology to create these efficiencies and eliminate the potential for human error.
Armin, thank you for your wise counsel, if I could go that far, and obviously calling out sort of the different facets, whether the technology is amendable or customizable to the evolution of your business, along with the importance of sort of getting an independent perspective on your business. They're all sound advice. Rob, I'll borrow Randy's 25-year plus example and maybe ask you for your final words in terms of adopting technology and obviously what you've seen in the industry, given the years of experience in our front.
It's a really interesting question, right? Because a lot of times when people are selecting technology, they're very concerned about the requirements du jour. What do I need today? But the thing that will trip you up with technology is the stuff you're going to need to do tomorrow you don't know about yet. How do you select software that's going to do that? And it's exactly what Armin said, which is you need to look at the underlying architecture and capabilities. Is it adaptable? Is it configurable? Does it embody best practices, right? Because if it does, chances are in the future it will as well. So for example, can you share a best practice from one financial services firm to another? Is that automatic, or is that something you have to request? Those kinds of deep analysis are what allow you to get to something that really works for you. So it's a tough thing to do, but when you are finding the right technology, you really are looking for the right technology partner, because that's the firm that's going to take the technology to where it needs to go. So do they understand the industry? Do they understand the regulations? Do they understand the regulators? Do they know how to keep up so that you stay on top of things?
Yeah, I was gonna say not only that, but will they work with you when something comes up? I mean,
right.
Change next
Culture.
year.
Yeah.
Are they going to be around, or are they going to be impossible to reach?
Yeah. Are they properly funded? Right.
This has been a fantastic conversation. Tom, Armin, Bob, and Mr. Barnes, thank you for spending an hour of your time with us. There's plenty of more to talk about. As I said off the top, there's a Lunch and Learn series we're going to invite everyone to. Obviously, this is a community-based discussion, and there's plenty of learning from each other. So we'll follow up today's conversation with that as well. Thank you all again for attending, and have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.